Hi folks, Jason here. In this video we're going to be exploring painting in Substance Painter, primarily just using certain techniques to kind of create that very kind of painterly effect that you find in rare games, but also just as a way to explore Substance Painter and some of the effects that you can kind of come up with within the program. So hopefully you'll find it useful, and yeah, let's get into it. So you can see here I've got the model in Substance Painter. We've got basically sort of, this is supposed to be sort of like obsidian, so it's that kind of like sort of greenish, kind of mystical, kind of like glass-like kind of rock that's used for sort of daggers. I did use some reference I'll show you shortly for this, and I just added some more to it really. And I've got this wooden handle here with some sort of leatherish kind of cloth straps on it. But the aim was to kind of make it not so realistic, to kind of make it look a bit more kind of painterly. So deliberately kind of painted into it using a sort of variety of different methods. Actually quite simple really, just with a bit of a bump on some of the paint, but mainly just painting onto it. I've got a sort of really a handful of layers here that I've used, nothing particularly sophisticated about them, and the results I think are quite impressive. Things like the emissive lighting as well, we can look into that and how you kind of create that. But yeah, let's move on to how I got to create this painted model. So I start off by just creating a very low poly dagger. Essentially I use this as reference. Also I use this as reference as well, this other image. I think it is official Sea of Thieves art, but you know, this kind of like obsidian type of glass kind of shard type thing, whatever. So it's kind of like a combination of that and also this, and yeah, really just making it as low poly as possible. I mean, the model as it stands, as you can see there on the top left, I mean, it's about what, 748 verts. It's got 625 faces. So you know, it's pretty low poly, and I kept it as that. I did develop it, I did make it more high poly, but then I baked that into the final version in Substance, which I will show you. But that was pretty much it. If you do want to see a video of how I sort of created this, I'm happy to do that and take you through it. I will also make this available alongside the video as well. If you wanted to kind of use this and then paint into it yourself, you're more than welcome. So that was the initial stage of it, and obviously I'd use 3D cut and sew. And if I just go through to the editor there, I'll just bring this down. You can see there it was quite tricky to do, so a lot of it I just did automatic. There were lots of I was able to kind of do like the big parts, but things like the sort of leather cloth straps were quite difficult to do, and also I was kind of running out of time, so I just did it kind of pretty automatically. There aren't that many pieces to it, but it's you know, it was, if you could, maybe if you had a bit more time, or if I had a bit more time, I could maybe, like, you know, stitch and sew parts of this together just so it's a bit more kind of linear, just so it's a bit kind of neater. But anyway, that was that. And then what I did was I put it over into Blender. Now you could just use ZBrush, that's absolutely fine, but I put it through into Blender. I remeshed it, I think at about 0.05, and then basically sculpted into it. Now I didn't go too far with it, so it's really just flattening the edges, flattening some of these areas here, just so it didn't look so it's so sort of square and so low poly. And I put a bit of a sort of sort of sculpt into there, and also just bits around the handle and just sort of sculpted into it. So essentially what I did was I took the low poly and I took the high poly, and then basically when you go to import into Substance Painter, you essentially, what you do is you kind of go you go into new, you import your model, and then in order to kind of bake the details down, you can see there, if you just kind of turn it where the light's catching it, you can see like the bump on there. See, none of that is real. So even though it looks sculpted, even here, you know, where it looks like I kind of like sculpted into it, it's all, that's fake. It's just part of the bump from the high poly model. And there's also parts where I kind of used like an alpha brush and created a bit of a bump with the painting. But essentially what you do is when it comes through to doing the baking the high poly, essentially what you'd be doing is baking the mesh maps and basically bringing your high poly model into this and then baking it down. But again, I can kind of go through that process. The main purpose of this video really was just to have a go at really just doing the painting. So yeah, so the next part of the video really is just going to be re-importing the model, baking the high poly model onto it, and then just having a look really at some of the painting. Probably not going to like complete the entire thing, but at least kind of get you going with some of the painting, some of the effects, and then you can just take it away and have a play and have some fun with it. So that'll be coming up in the next part of the video. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to File and New, and where it says File and Select, we're going to go and find the low poly model. So it's going to go and find the folder, which is there. Dagger's going to double click on it. It's the low poly one that we want to choose first. I'm going to go Open. Going to make the resolution about 2048. It's entirely up to you. The lower down, of course, you know, it depends on like what game you're making. It could be for like a mobile, in which case you may not need to be that big, but I'm going to go for 2048. And once you've got that, it's going to go to OK. And I'm just going to save any changes I made there. That's fine. Let's give it a second. Okay, so here we are. So we've got our low poly model there. So it looks fine, but we need a bit more detail on there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to, if you don't see it, if you just got layers there, go to where it says Texture Set Settings, go on there. You're going to go to Bake Mesh Maps, go and select that. So output size, again, we're going to make that 2048. And then here, we've got this little icon document here. We're going to go and choose the high poly. I'm going to go and click on that, open that. And that's pretty much it, really. All you need to do is go to the bottom where it says Bake Selected Textures. I'm going to go and click on that. And basically, it's just going to go through doing the normals, all the other stuff, the ambient occlusion and whatnot. So just give that a second. Excellent. Going to click OK. And there you can see now it's kind of baked in the sort of details from the high poly, but is still really low poly, so it's a very cool feature within the program. So cool. So we're pretty much ready to go, really. Now you will need some sort of reference. Now, as I mentioned before, I've got multiple screens going on here. If you recall, if I just bring this down a second, you'll see there. I'll just bring this up now. We've got the one of the pictures that I chose with the obsidian shard on it, and then there's another one. I'll just show you here. There we go. So I'll be using that as reference. So if you want to kind of go like split screen on your monitor, you can sort of do it that way. I'm just going to move this over to one side. And there should be another, there we go, there's the other dagger. Now let's show you that there so you just can see it. And yeah, so I'm going to be sort of working from that as well. And just looking at, you know, how I can sort of emulate. It's mainly these kind of details. So it's going to be mainly kind of these details as reference. And then we're going to have this thing with the blade here and just seeing what I can kind of do with that, really. But again, as I mentioned before, not really aiming to kind of complete this, but it's mainly just to kind of get you going, and then from there, hopefully, you know, you'll be able to produce some cool stuff. So I think probably like something like the blade as good a point as any to start working into it. So in this next part, we're going to be basically going into the really into the painting, about how to kind of lay like a base layer down there, and also using some different grades to kind of create this kind of the different kind of angles, and also to add a little bit of a bump as well just to kind of give the paint a slight kind of realistic feel. So that'll be coming up in the next part of the video. Okay, folks, so let's get into it. I'm not going to go through absolutely everything in the interface. I'm just saying this for anyone who's relatively new to Substance Painter. There's a lot of stuff you don't need to worry about. We've got general tools here. So I've got a layer already sort of set up here. You could call this like the base layer. So it's a bit like Photoshop. So you can say base layer. Let's call it that. You do that just by double clicking. And you can choose one of these materials. I've got like just a standard material set up here, but you could choose any number of these things. You'll see on the left-hand side here, if you scroll with your middle mouse, the main thing we're going to be working with really is brushes and materials. Brushes, like alpha brushes, just like in Photoshop, you've got all different types. I've got this kind of dotted kind of effect going on here, which you can kind of play around with. And you got, stuff like that. And then with the materials, you got a whole range of everything from kind of like carbon fiber, metal, some riveted type stuff, concrete, flesh texture. You can mess around with all these as well. They're not set in stone. You can change some of the parameters with them. But yeah, you can see here we've got iron and things like that. So for example, if I chose something like iron, I just double clicked on that, you'll see it shows up there. You can play around with some of the if you sort of scroll with the middle mouse, if we just go back up to the top, you'll see here, there's the brush, there's the material. If I sort of scroll down and we kind of get to the material, you've got things like the color, obviously, the height. There's no height turned on for some reason. There's roughness in the metal. If you wanted to, you could select those as well, so they're activated. It just means then you can play around with the parameters. So if I were to say just scroll in a little bit and just start painting, you'll see there doesn't really appear to be much height. It's kind of just painting the surface, but you can sort of play around with it a bit more like that. So you kind of got this bubbling effect. It can be quite useful for things like, indeed, with metal, things like rust and whatnot, if you wanted to kind of create a bit of a texture. On top of that, though, what you can do is you can also take it in the reverse. So I don't know if you can see there, if I then take this down into the negative, it'll actually start to work it the other way around as well. So you can kind of work back and forth like that if you wish. Other things are, you've got the eraser tool. Again, you can choose any type of brush you want with that. So if I go back to brushes and say, just choose, say, one of these brushes, something like that, you can actually start to take part of it out. If you wanted to use like something like a similar brush that was using before, you can either control the brush size, looking at this at the top left, move it down that way, or hold down Control, and with the middle mouse you can kind of scroll back and forth. That can be a lot easier. But this way what you can do is you can actually have a more subtle effect with the erasing. So you're using the eraser as a tool. Projection, not going to get into that right now, but basically you can, and if we move on to the smudge tool now, if we just go and select a brush, something like dots for example, I'm just going to scale that down a little bit, you can actually smudge these. Now I need to make sure on the bottom right here that you've got color, height, roughness and metal and normal turned on, depending on which ones, but the most important ones are the height and the normal. And they can actually smudge some of these things. Let's try another brush actually. Let's try that one there. Let's just scale this down. You can see there you can actually play around with the height, smudge the height. Again, you can get some very interesting effects. Let's try another one. What's this? Dirt. So by all means, have a play around with that. Not going to go into the clone tool. I've not really played around with that much. So I looked at brushes, looked at materials. So let's go back to perhaps creating another layer on here. So I'm going to go to the right here and just go create add layer. I can call this say paint. So this is how you can sort of begin to kind of manipulate what you've got. So for example, at the moment I've got this metallic material created there. I'm going to click on height, click on normal, and I can take away or play around with some of the themes on here. So for example, I could change the color, and obviously it's kind of metallic, so we can maybe have a look at maybe making it not so metallic and perhaps also not so rough. So we just take it down to a base color essentially. Not going to play around with the normals. We'll basically, what we'll do here is we'll probably just increase the height a little bit. So we've got that as the base color with a little bit of height, not so much roughness. And then we've got the layer here. So if I just go and select, let's move in a little bit here and take that down, you can actually start to paint. Now let's try a different brush. Let's try charcoal instead. So you can see there now. Now the cool thing is, because it's got a little bit of height on it, you got like a sort of painterly effect. And what that means is if you go back to the smudge tool now, and let's just scale that down a little bit, you can actually begin to, let's just try something else a bit more, something that's a bit more, what about this knife painting? Let's try it. There we go. So you can sort of create this almost like oil paint type effect. And again, just have a play with some of this stuff. It definitely helps to kind of mess around, try and get a feel for it, see what works best, experiment. So that's quite nice. So you can kind of get this blending effect going on. So if I go back to the paint tool now, I can even change the color of this. So maybe have a look at, I don't know, let's go for something a bit more, there we go, pink. What about pink? So I can paint a bit of a pink in there, like so. We can go back to smudge, and they can actually start to blend these together. And again, just, you know, maybe have an experiment with some brushes. Now, if you want to also increase the height, just increase the height. Go back to the paint tool, and we'll go to the height again. So at the moment it's quite minimal, but if we take that quite up a little bit, let's go back to the paint, and now you can see that's really increased it, and you can just keep going with it. Just depends on what you're going for, like so. And then you can go back to your smudge tool and just you know, smudge some of this stuff together. Maybe let's choose a different brush. You know, blend the two of them together. So after clearing the layers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of just creating a normal layer, I'm going to create a fill layer, because I want to essentially create like a sort of a base for the colors. Now I'm going to choose the material, because I want to, if I just bring this over to the side a little bit, I've got my reference here for the blade. So I want to go for like a sort of dark teal type of color, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one of these materials. It doesn't really matter which one we choose. It's just mainly just to kind of get that, get the effect that we want. So I've chosen even just something like that. That's fine. You can play around with the parameters. So for example, let me just turn the maybe actually turn the height off, and the normals off, and even the roughness off, but we'll change the base color. So I want this more like that kind of teal color, so I'm just going to bring this up. Let's bring this up there like that. So something like, it's kind of like a greeny bluey kind of color, and let's darken it a little bit. Now it's flooding the entire blade at the moment because we haven't put a mask on, so something maybe like, could be something like that. That might do. And then in order to kind of like to use the Polygon Fill tool, what we're going to need to do is create a mask. So I'm going to click on this little square here with a circle in it and go Add Black Mask. Now that'll mask the entire thing off. But the fun thing is that if we have the Polygon Fill selected, we can actually begin to block this in. Now you don't have to do it like that. You could even just block it in like that, using like the marquee. Okay, I'm just going to do parts of the other side. So this is just going to be like a base layer. Now on top of this, I'm just going to be using primarily, you know, like paint layers. So I'm going to go and create a paint layer now. On top of that, I'm going to go back to the paintbrush there. And we'll call this, well, I'll tell you what, we'll rename that as base, dagger base. And then we'll just call this dagger. And what I'm going to do here is with the materials, I'm going to go for like a lighter color. So something, you know, probably like mid-range. So on the where we've got the materials set here, I'm going to change the color. I'm going to make that perhaps like a slightly lighter color, something like that. Now I want this to be matte because in the rare style it's kind of quite matte, so I'm going to just make the roughness fairly kind of, yeah, make it quite, maybe even something like that. Really take it down. Don't really need any of the metallic either, so I'm just going to have a look. I don't think I've got it selected anyway. Where are we? I'll take the metal off. Let's just do it that way. So all we've got really is color and roughness. You could even just take that out. So we just got the color. Let's just do that. And basically ready to kind of paint into it. So if I, with that layer selected, and obviously I've got that kind of that color now. Let's have a little test and just see. There we go. So we can start basically block it in now. So you can see, you know, the style is it's kind of cut out, it's kind of chipped out. So essentially I'm going to be working with kind of maybe 3 to 4 different types of grades. We've got the dark, we've got that as a base, and then we've got like maybe some lighter colors and also some highlights. So I'm just going to move that over to the side a little bit and just put that in view over to the side a little bit like that. Okay, so I'm basically just start painting into it. Now at this point I'm just going to start using the Wacom brush. Okay, so once you've created the blade, we're ready to kind of move on to say like the guard area and maybe a bit of the handle. So you can create a base layer for this if you like, you know, if you want to be a bit more precise with the handle. So go and create like say a fill layer, and let's choose like a sort of grungy metal color. Something like, what could we go for? Something like a kind of raw iron, maybe something like that. So we could have that as a, you know, as the, you know, to kind of to fill it. Obviously, we're not filling the entire blade. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a black mask, and then over in the Polygon Fill tool, this is where essentially you can sort of fill it in. So all we need to do here is just double click or just drag, and it will actually fill that in. So this is good for, like, you know, you don't necessarily have to do this. You could just use just layers if you want. It's just if you want to be a bit more precise and have some clearly defined kind of edges, then it's quite useful for that. So don't worry if you're thinking, oh, adding masks and things like that is a bit of a headache. If you just want to just basically go on and paint, just paint. That's absolutely fine. Just depends what you're going for. That's all. So in this instance, though, I'm doing it this way. And then once you've done that, you can go and create another layer, perhaps just a regular paint layer. And then on here, you can basically start to add some effects to it. So like at the beginning of the video, you might want to add some, let's say, you could even, I'll tell you what, you could even use something like a thing called artificial leather. And in the brushes, what I can do is I can maybe even have a look at that. Where's that brush again? It's like a sort of dotted, like dirt effect or something like that. Or is it dots? I think it was, wasn't it? Dots. Let's go for that anyway. Spattered type effect. And what I'll do is I'll shrink that down. Now the cool thing is, because this has got like a bump on it, you can actually just start to put things like that in there perhaps. Add those in. Just so it's not so kind of perfect. You could even like cut into it as well, so you could maybe even use a different type of brush. What could we use? Something like, I don't know, maybe even something like that. Let's have a look. And let's take the size of that down a little bit. And then we can sort of try and like cut into it. So something like, let's take the size of that down a little bit. Just zoom out a little bit. So you can kind of create this, you know, like it's kind of seen a bit of battle, right? So you kind of got this chopped up kind of effect kind of going on. And obviously you can use things like the Smudge Tool as well to kind of play around with it. You know, add to it. So, you know, the potential is really endless for stuff like this. You know, you can really go to town. You don't want to do too much, though. You can end up with a little bit too much noise. So I'd just be wary about adding too much. I can often do this with work. I can kind of go a little bit over the top and start playing around with like effects. And it starts to, yeah, it starts to kind of change it in, you know, in a negative way because you're, you know, it's getting away from the original idea. So it's just something to bear in mind. Let's just add like another chop mark here, like so. Then you can maybe just smudge into it. Things like the straps or the handle and the straps, you could use like a wood effect. So again, I could let's say I'll just name the layers. Let's call that dagger 3. Call that dagger 2 because it's very easy to kind of get lost in all this. Okay, and what we can do here is we can sort of create another layer. What we'll probably do this time though is create a layer. I'll call this handle. And what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to use like a wood effect. So let's just have a look at see what there is. Sorry, in the materials, wood. So we've got some different types of wood. That's quite nice, like woody grain type color. Can maybe use that. Now you can just do a regular paint into it. That's one way of doing it. So let's just increase the brush size there. I've got this particular brush that's probably a little bit dark actually. Let's just try this one instead. That's quite interesting. Now you can, you know, that's quite useful for some things. Maybe you want a little bit more control. I mean, it's quite cool actually. You've got like quite a sort of painterly effect going on there. That might not be for you though. You want to use something like a bit more control. And this is where you could have a look at like the projection. So if I go and select the projection, what I can do here is I can project the wood onto it. Yeah. So, and all you do is really, it's you can basically hold down S to kind of rotate, left mouse button to zoom in and out, and then you can use the middle mouse button and S to kind of move it around that way. But basically what you can do here is you can sort of choose sort of broader area and something like that. Normals aren't turned on, so I can maybe turn the normals on that as well, so we've got a bit more of a sort of bump going on perhaps. And then what we can do here is simply just paint into it. Maybe change the brush though, so let's go for a lot more neutral type of brush, maybe even something like that, basic soft, like that. So that could be one way. So you're not you're kind of going in the right direction grain wise. So that's one option anyway. And then another option is with that projection selected, you can just sort of paint over the top like so. And that way you kind of get more of a kind of, you know, more of the sort of grain. And that might be something for you to kind of work into. And again, you can sort of do the same on the other side. So it's entirely up to you. There's no real right or wrong way with this. Main thing is just you know, have some fun with it. But, you know, obviously you wouldn't stop there. You know, you might want to, if I go back to the drawing tool, so you can see there, we've got a bit of a bump on there now. And it might be, you know, you want to work into it. So you could, for example, you know, tidy up a bit on the layer, take some of that out. Same on the other side. But then what you can do is you can sort of, using that brush I was using before, and let's use a different material. I think I was using the artificial leather, wasn't I? And then what we can do here is we can, might even choose a different brush this time. Let's have a look at the brushes. Let's have a look at maybe even that dirt. See what that does. And then if I just zoom in and just move in to say something like that, might just take the size of that brush down a wee bit more. You can actually start cutting into the grain a little bit. Just zoom out a little bit there. So, you know, you're basically like accentuating it. In fact, I might just go for something a bit different to that. Maybe even something, maybe even that. Let's try that. Just wanted something that was a little bit kind of rougher. And then kind of work around that handle. So as you're kind of painting with the brushes, that kind of like the intensity of the colours, depending on what you're using, kind of comes through the more you apply pressure to it. So let's say something like that. So you can see also, like from a modeling point of view, it's you don't necessarily need to kind of put a lot of detail in with the model. You can just work into it in programs like this, or even things like, you know, 3D coat, you know, depending on what your preferences are. So, you know, don't think that you have to kind of make the models completely, you know, detailed. There's a lot of that that can be answered in the, you know, at this stage. Okay, so, you know, you get the general idea. You can kind of like work into it like that, and then do this, and then carry the grain on. So, you know, maybe using this grain as a guide. Because the idea is trying to make it look a bit more cartoony and less kind of real. So say something like that. And then if you want to kind of add a bit of shade, you can do. So you can maybe even use a different type of brush, like a soft brush. Something like maybe even the dots. Let's try that. Now it might be that you don't want the normals turned on for this part. So what we can do is, because we want to kind of like create a bit of sort of shading, so what we could effectively do is turn, say, the height off. So when we paint into it, I just come around to here, let's just zoom in. So when I paint into it, I'm not having to kind of think about it making an indent. It's just more like grime. So picture this like weapon being like, you know, it's seen a lot of action, so it's not going to be super clean. I might just choose something like that instead. Let's have a look at that. Let's try that out. Oh, that's a bit better, isn't it? And then sort of working like that, just so you kind of get this nice kind of worn, weathered kind of effect. Now for the actual straps, maybe what you might want to do is Let's choose a different brush. Basically take this out, because you'll have that layer coming through otherwise. I mean, you can paint on the top if you want, but it might be you want it to kind of be a bit cleaner. So again, I'm kind of rushing this. You can take your time with it, but essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to, you can probably hear me madly scurrying away with the Wacom brush, just rubbing that out. But oh, maybe not. That's a little bit extreme. Let's just take that down a little bit. And then with the leather part of it, again, I think I've got it. Where is it? Oh, over here. So with this, for the leather or cloth straps, again, you can either use a projection on this, do your own work and project onto it, or just use it as some kind of reference. Look at the kind of creasing and kind of go, okay, I'll just go with that. So I'm just going to sort of do this on the fly, but essentially what I'd do here is I'd first of all just select some kind of material. It could be maybe something like that as a fabric base, and I'll create another layer and I'll call this straps. And again, you can play around with some of the parameters on here. Height, don't really need the height on it, don't really need the roughness, don't need the metal, we just really need the color. So we can just kind of go with that. And in terms of the color, it's going to be more of a kind of, I guess, reddish color, something like that. So we'll go for something like maybe that kind of red, but a kind of darker red. Now again, if you wanted to, you could use that method that I was showing you before, where you can do a mask, or you can just paint into it. I'm just showing you these options just to show you there's no real hard and fast rule. You know, I can sort of, you know, do all manner of different things in terms of approaches. It's entirely up to you. Don't feel that you need to kind of do it one particular way. If it's easy for you just to kind of work this way and just paint, then just paint. It's absolutely fine. A lot of the other stuff, you know, you see on, you know, is great YouTubers who are doing these like multi kind of masked, multi-layered and things like that. That's all great. It can be a little bit advanced for some people, particularly if you're kind of new to modeling and things like that. Whereas this method is just get a model, paint it. Is you know, just might be your preferred way, and then, you know, you might get a bit more advanced as you go along. But anyway, there we go. So I've got that as a kind of little base layer, and then if I go and maybe line it up a little bit like so, I can then start adding some highlights, right? So you're a bit like the blade, you can start kind of. So if this is some kind of like material, I can maybe just start adding into it. Maybe even like, you know, oops, maybe choose a different brush here. Basic soft maybe. Let's try that. There we go. A bit less severe, you know, and then basically start you know, working your way around and adding some highlights and things like that. You know, something like that. And if you wanted to, you can you know, add some darker areas. So if I go back to the color, let's go to the and let's maybe just go and create like more like a highlight, perhaps not so white, but just something that's kind of just going to add just a little bit on that edge. But you can see, you know, really in a short space of time what you can achieve with this. And hopefully, you know, you found this, you know, quite useful for what you're trying to achieve with this, you know, the Rare project, or even with any other projects. And maybe we've got to make that a little bit darker, actually. Let's go back. You know, for like more like the inner parts, the bits that are kind of a bit more shaded. You know, just to kind of add a bit more depth, really. But that is pretty much it, folks. As I mentioned before, I wasn't really aiming to kind of like complete this totally, you know, within the session, but it's mainly just to kind of, you know, show you a little bit of the process, a little bit of, you know, how you can achieve these types of effects in Substance. Again, it's quite a vast area. There's lots to kind of get into, but if you're just kind of getting going, or even if you're like intermediate user of Substance Painter, hopefully that's going to at least give you some ideas about what you can achieve. Other than that, that's it really. So thanks for watching, and yeah, hope you find it useful, and yeah, she'll catch you in the next video. Okay, thanks a lot, folks. Bye for now. Okay, so just before I wrap this up, I'm just going to take a look at creating some emissive paint. You may recall this from earlier in the video. Kind of got this like light at the tip of the dagger kind of coming through and kind of, you know, in kind of cracks. It's relatively simple to do, just need to make a few adjustments. So first of all, let's enable it. So I'm going to go through to the texture set settings, and where you see this plus symbol here, I'm going to click on that and then select emissive. So now what we'll see in the sort of properties below, you'll see it there sort of showing up in the materials. That's the one that's enabled. That's what we want to see. If the rest of them are enabled, just click them off until that one's just showing. So that's all good. I'm going to go back to the layers, and I'm going to create a fill layer, and on there I'm just going to deselect now all of the other ones apart from the emissive. And next I'm going to click on below where it says emissive, and it's going to bring these up on the right here, and it's going to go and select the color. So it's going to be something like a kind of, yeah, kind of turquoisey, kind of bluey kind of color, something like that. So you can see there it's lighting up the entire thing. So we need to create a black mask for this, just so, because we're going to be painting in with a white brush to reveal what's here. So I'm going to go to where it says add mask. I'm going to select that and go add black mask. So now that's covered. So that's kind of effectively kind of being covered, ready for us to kind of start painting into. So you'll need, obviously, in the paint section here, a white brush. We'll need to kind of select a particular kind of, I don't know, something like, let's go and select a brush from the brushes. I don't know, I could go for something like, let's just go for something simple, something like that, felt tip. Okay, and we can just start kind of drawing in there and hashing in these kind of cracks. Now at the moment they're not looking especially emissive. It kind of looks fairly light, but it's not really doing anything at the moment. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to sort of sketch in a little bit, and I'm going to show you the process of how we then bring this to life. So do a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. Okay, right, looking good. So how we actually bring this to life is we're going to need to go through to the display settings, and we're going to, if you don't see it already, you're going to need to scroll down to where it says activate post effects. Going to go and select that, and the bit that we actually want to kind of create that wow effect is in the glare. I'm going to go and select that now, and you can see there it kind of brings it to life. It kind of got this really lovely glow. Now you can also change it. So at the moment it's on bloom. If you wanted to maybe put it as a lens flare, you could do that. So you kind of where you get this kind of refracted kind of light. That's pretty cool. Might be what you're after. Who knows? You can play around with some of these settings like the luminance. We've got the threshold. Also got this remap factor, and also in the shader settings, you can also play around with emissive intensity, so you can really blast it out if you wanted to. I mean, we don't want to go too far with this, but something that kind of just looks like it's kind of got a bit of that. So you can go back and forth anyway and play around with it. And then from there, all you need to do really is just kind of continue sketching in. And depending on the intensity, if you kind of work into it, it will start to kind of glow. So it does respond to pen pressure as well. So we can kind of go and play with, like, say, bits like that. So it's really nice, you know, it's like you're kind of like drawing with light. So it's got like a really nice kind of feel about it. And you can get some quite interesting effects there too. And again, you can play around with the smudge tool as well. So it'll respond well with the smudge tool. You can maybe blend that, do something there with it. Who knows? Just mainly just have a bit of fun to see what works. But it's quite impressive, you know, what you can achieve with this. And of course the applications as well, you know, you can, it doesn't have to be something like this. It could be anything, computer dials, it could be, you know, circuitry, it could be something, you know, in an environment, you name it. But that is pretty much it, folks. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you've got any questions, of course, you can let me know. And other than that, look forward to seeing what you produce in the coming future. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye for now.